Now, when it comes to sewing, we really only need a small handful of items. The obvious being, of course, our sewing machine, along with some threads and needles to go with it. Now, on top of that, it would be really useful to have some pins, a tape measure, some fabric scissors, a seam ripper, a marking pen or chalk, and an iron. Now, with those simple items, you should be able to go from absolute beginner all the way up to expert. We know this because that's what they've been using for decades. But other things exist that can really help us out with our sewing. So I thought I'd share with you my lucky 7 items which I absolutely love, which have really helped me improve my sewing in the past year. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate and this is Ripper Seams. Now, as sewists, we are all very unique and wonderful people, and the things that we choose to sew with are very much a personal choice. This of course can be impacted by what's available to you, how much it costs, and whether it is actually going to be useful for you. Now, when I curated this list, I really had to keep in frame of what my goal is with my sewing, and that is to have ripper seams. I mean, like really good quality seams, which results in a good quality garment, which will then have a really long lifetime. So from there, I made a list of standout items of things which I use on a regular basis, which are perhaps a little bit unusual, things of which I heard in passing from other vloggers or on Instagram, which I thought, ooh, I might try that, that looks interesting. So I compiled those into my lucky 7 list, and they're the things we're going to share with you today. So let's take a look at number 7. So coming in hot at number 7 are my set of tube turners. Now, there are 3 different sizes here, and I absolutely love these. Now, I have tried other methods of turning through skinny straps and rouleau loops and have failed and cannot do it. These are the only things that will work for me. I love the 3 different sizes. I have used all of them. Now, I have 2 different color sets here, and that's a testament as to how much I use them, because I bought the blue set first, I misplaced them, and then was left distraught because I was having trouble turning through my loops. So I went and bought another set, these ones in purple, and of course as soon as I had done that, I found the blue ones. Now, they're not the cheapest, but I do find they're extremely useful, and it also doesn't ruin your garments. Now, I have tried using this one in the past, which is the one with the little hook on the end. However, I find that I tend to damage the end of the loop, particularly when you've got it sewn shut and you're trying to hook it through and pull it through. I just find that it undoes the stitching, it starts fraying, it makes a right mess. Now, I think that would be really useful if you've got really skinny spaghetti straps, but for the most part, I find these are perfectly fine for any size strap that I'm currently using. So if you find the loop turners as a sewing item a little bit pricey, then you can also go and raid your kitchen drawers for some straws. Now, I have got a smoothie straw here, and I have a metal kind of drink straw here. These are exactly the same thing. Just find a little bit of dowel or a chopstick or something and feed them through. These are an absolute bargain. So I have these in my kit as well. So yep, if you want to try them out, try the straws first. Next up, in 6th position, we have my seam gauges. Now, I have 2 of these. The only difference between the 2 of them is that one is black and one is silver. They are otherwise identical. So when I first started out sewing, I just used a standard flexible measuring tape, but that of course is really long and a little bit cumbersome and really hard to kind of maneuver. These, however, they're small and they're rigid, and they also have these little slidey things which can help kind of lock in the measurement that you want. So these very quickly became an absolute favorite. So my number 1 use for this is whenever I have to be consistent when turning up the edge of a piece of fabric. I will either sit down somewhere with this and my garment and just go around and pin up my hem using this as my guide, or I might use this at the ironing board when I'm turning up the edges for some bias tape. Now, the other great use for these is also just measuring up your seam allowance at your sewing machine. So I'll place the start of the gauge where my needle is on my machine and then measure out where my required seam allowance is. This is really good if you've got a slightly unusual seam allowance going on, so you can very easily tell where you need to line up the edge of your fabric, which I can measure out and then maybe put some washi tape down. Okay, this one in particular has the pointy end, which is really good for turning out points in a garment, such as points of a collar, for example, or anything that needs kind of a little sharp edge, although it does have this bit at the end which kind of turns out. I thought there was just one, there's actually 2. Does anybody know what this is for? Let me know in the comments section. It's a mystery, I'd love to know. So next up in 5th position is woven interfacing, and this has been a big game changer for me indeed. Now, I was aware about interfacing and the different weights of interfacing that you get, and also that you had stretch interfacing, which you would use with kind of knit fabrics. Now, I didn't realize that there was also a woven version, which is this. And man, I'm so glad that I found it. Now, with regular interfacing, it is a whole bunch of fibers that have been all mashed up and felted to create the fabric that you get. As a result of that, you can actually put your pattern pieces in any sort of direction. You don't have to worry about a grain line, which is actually absolutely fantastic. And you know what? I actually only found that out whilst researching this video, and I've actually been trying to find a grain line there, and that's probably why I hate the interfacing bit of sewing. I can't stand it. I hate the feel of interfacing, and I can never really tell when it's ironed on properly. It's just one of the bits of sewing which I don't find as enjoyable. That is until I stumbled across woven interfacing and gave it a try. I've got it here in white and black. I have seen it in other colors as well, and effectively, rather than being kind of mashed up felted fibers, this is actually just a very light cotton which has got the iron-on element on the other side. So as a result of this, rather than being kind of like a more papery feel, this is definitely feels like fabric because it is basically cotton. Now, because it is cotton, when it's attached to your fabric, it still maintains a lot of flow and it moves with your garment better while still creating the stability that it's been inserted for. Now, there's only a couple of drawbacks to switching to woven interfacing. First off is it's a lot more expensive, but secondly, you also have to make sure that you match up your grain line with your pieces. Now, the grain line is obvious on there, so it shouldn't be too much of a bother. Now, I've also started buying my interfacing in bulk, so I've got 3 meters in this hand and I've got about 1.5 in the black here. I use it so often and I just don't want to run out of this stuff. Now, I have got my other interfacing, my regular non-woven interfacing. It has its uses, great for making bags and hats. I don't have a problem with it. I just prefer this interfacing for my garment making. At number 4, we have yet another interfacing item, and that is iron-on bias tape. This is a 1 centimeter tape, which is made out of interfacing, which has been cut on the bias. Now, on top of that, it has a very fine chain stitch, which is running along one edge. And I find this incredibly useful for shoring up necklines and armholes ready for sewing. And the reason is it just gives more support than what a regular stay stitch would. The interfacing bit just gives that extra bit of strength where you may need to attach a facing or a sleeve head, but you also have that chain stitch on there to make sure that those areas don't stretch. Now, all you have to do is cut a piece that is equal to your neckline or your armhole and then just ease it around the curve as you iron it. You just apply it the same as any other interfacing. When I use this, I tend to find that those curved pieces of sewing are a lot neater and crisper than if I just use regular stay stitching. And because it is only 1 centimeter, it's normally hidden in your seam allowance. Now, the one I've got here is actually a Visaline one, which comes in black and grey, and you can buy it in a pre-cut packet of 5 meters. You can also buy it by the length. I'm actually just about to run out about this, and I've totally run out of the black, so I'm going to go buy about 10 meters of each one, so I've got it in my stash because I do find this really handy. If you haven't given this a try, I do recommend. And in 3rd place, who gets the bronze medal? Well, that is this sewing machine foot here. And this is my blind hem foot. So both my beginner's sewing machine and my current sewing machine came with a blind hem foot as part of the package. And I'm so glad that I figured out what it was and tried it out, because now I can't live without it. I think the one thing that really elevates your sewing is not being able to see your hem stitch line. I'm actually surprised about how little I hear about blind hems. It makes me think, are people doing them? Are they not doing them? I don't know. I just love the look of a blind hem, because as much as it's totally fine to see your stitching around a hemline, not being able to see it is actually even better. Now, what made me crack out this little beauty and learn how to use it was actually when I sewed up the Summer in New York dress by Seasons of East. This dress is beautiful, but the very last instruction it has on there is to finish off your edges, turn up your seam allowance, and then hand stitch all the way around to kind of secure all the hemlines. Now, this is around the neck, it is around the long drapey sleeves, and it is also along the skirt edge as well as the slits. There is a lot of hand sewing to do on that, and I just went, too much hand sewing for me. Now I did have a little thought in my head that maybe I could use the blind hem foot that came with my machine to do that work for me, and I was right. So I installed this little foot, I read my sewing machine manual, and then I watched a bunch of YouTube channels, and then I had a go. Then I went around every single edge of that dress with this foot here, and it was a great success. I was so pleased with that. And now I do blind hems on every opportunity I have. So one extra little tip which I've learned recently when using this foot is to also maybe try some specialty blind hemming thread, which is what I've picked up from Empress Mills. Now these are 2 big spools which you can use just with an extra stand with your sewing machine. Whilst you can use your regular coloured threads that you're sewing with, these are great because these are much finer than regular sewing threads, so you can use just the black one on all darker fabrics and the white one on all lighter fabrics. Because it is so thin, it actually really becomes invisible. Now I have used these a couple of times, it's been quite successful so far, but whilst not officially on my list, I just wanted to call these out because they kind of go along with the blind hem foot. So yeah, if you've not started investigating what other feet come with your sewing machine, do dig this one out. I think this one is normally a standard that comes with sewing machines. If not, get yourself one and learn how to do a blind hem. You won't regret it. It will just really make your makes just get to the next level. So what's coming in second place, do you think? I'm actually really surprised about how much I use this next item. I am gobsmacked. I feel as if I'm cheating every single time I'm using it, but man, is it absolutely handy and I can't live without it. It is this. It is a glue stick. It is specifically a sewing glue stick, but we'll get into that in a minute. Now, this one in particular is made by Sewline, and it has a nice little cap to keep it all nice and secure. And then you can just twist up the top here to get your glue out, and the glue is blue. So when you're putting it on your fabric, you can actually see where you've applied it, which is really handy. You can also get little replacement cartridges to put in there, so you can be a little bit more conscious about how much plastic you're using as well. So this is a water-based glue, which means that once you've washed your garment, it will all just wash out and it will be like you've never used this glue stick at all. So where does a glue stick come in handy? And I mean, like, it's a better question of where it does not come in handy. So this glue stick is incredibly useful for those slippery, slidey fabrics which you have to manipulate and get under your sewing machine and make sure that your seams are ripper. I've found that when you are working with viscose or other slippery fabrics, even when you pin and clip your edges together, when you run them through the sewing machine, they still have a tendency to slip out of place. As a result, you may not get the neatest of seams as you go along. I find where I do have particularly tricky edges, I just apply glue to the seams a little bit at a time as I go. It will stick those 2 pieces of fabric together and they will stay like that. You don't have to use very much at all. Now this dries really, really fast. It also doesn't dry hard, so you don't get like a thick, crusty edge like you might think of some glues doing. I sometimes find that once I've used the glue, I don't even need to go in with pins to keep it together. I can then safely run it through my sewing machine and those 2 bits of fabric will stay together and you will tend to have much nicer, crisper seam lines. Because it is a very fine, fast drying glue, I've had no issues with my sewing machine in using it. The needle hasn't stuck to it, it hasn't gummed up the work, everything's been working fine. So one place where I definitely use this glue stick is when I'm applying bias tape. So what I do is I attach the first side of the bias tape to the garment, and then just as you are getting ready to fold over the other side for stitching, I run a nice healthy kind of line of glue along that edge. So when I fold it over just past the stitching line and then give it a good press down and it kind of stays there. I might still use pins in this case, but for the most part that glue will stick on there. I can then stitch in the ditch on the other side knowing that my tape is kind of in position and I can always make sure I catch it when I run it through the machine. So this has been an absolute game changer in getting that bias tape application really, really nice, neat and perfect. This is also really good for when you want to position your pockets onto your garment ready for sewing, but also for applying for your cute and funny woven labels that you put into your garments. It just really helps position and align those and making sure they stay put when you're ready to sew. You can also just go and use a regular school easygoing water-based glue stick. This one obviously is a big chunky one. If I've got a big thing that I need to do, I also use this Pritt stick. It is effectively the same thing. This one is just not blue, although I know you can get colored ones. I know there's a purple one or something. I do prefer to use this one though, because it does have the fine line, so it does have a really good purpose. It's worth paying that extra amount. But if you want to give gluing a try, just try the Pritt stick. It does exactly the same job. So what number one item has been extremely useful and helped me gain confidence as a beginner sewist to really elevate my makes and kind of really make my sewing a success? Well, she's been lurking behind me the whole entire time of this video, and that is Barbara. For those of you who have not yet been introduced to Barbara, this is Barbara here. She is my wonderful dress form, and she has been helping me on my sewing journey immensely. Now, Barbara is incredibly special to me because she is a gift from my husband for our very first wedding anniversary. He threw that paper tradition right out the window for this one, and I absolutely love him for it. Not only that, but he also bought me some Liberty fabric to go with it, which is this lovely cotton lawn, which I made this sagebrush out of. So yeah, find yourself a partner who buys you sewing gifts for your wedding anniversaries. He is a keeper for sure. Prior to Barbara's arrival, I had thought about getting a dress form, but I just didn't think that I was skilled enough to require one. How wrong I was, because I actually found that by having her, I've become more skilled. That is because this is a dress form which you can adjust for the most part to kind of replicate your own body measurements. In Barbara's case, she does have the same bust, waist and hip size as me. So when I am in the process of making my garments, I will go and place what I had sewn on her and just check for fit as we go. I find this incredibly useful because often when you put it on yourself, you can't always see yourself from all the different angles. So I tend to find when I put it on Barbara, I can straight away assess whether it's going to be a good fit on me, where there may be some fitting issues, whether something needs a dart or some sort of adjusting going on. Having a dress form to be able to see the garment in 360 degrees is an absolute win. Now, Barbara naturally has a lovely blue ditzy floral print on her. I did end up getting a plain beige bodysuit to put on her, a high neck one, just so that that blue ditzy fabric didn't always kind of clash with the fabric that I was putting on her. And that way I could really assess necklines and so on. If you do have a dress form and you find it a bit busy, try this little trick of putting a flesh colored bodysuit on. I actually got a high neck one, which was really, really handy. Give that a go and see how you get on. Yeah, Barbara's been wearing that ever since I've put it on her. Another good way I use Barbara for is to really assess how I might utilize a fabric. So I can just throw the fabric on. If it's a really big print, whether it's going to suit being a top, whether it can be a skirt, I can throw that fabric around her body, have a play with it and see what garment that fabric might be suitable for. Sometimes I've put a print on her which just looks too much as a full-on dress, but it looks perfect as a top or as a skirt. So it really helps me frame up whether I've made the right fabric choice or not. If you're wondering where Barbara got her name from, it is purely just an ongoing family joke. If it's an inanimate object, which is generally useful and quite often speaks to you, it gets called Barbara. So we have Barbara the sat-nav in the car, but we also have Barbara here, who is my dress form. And like the sat-nav, she speaks to me just in different ways. For the most part, dress forms are not cheap, and there's actually a big variety of the types you can get. But do keep an eye out on eBay or on Facebook Marketplace or even car boot sales. You often see them hanging around and you might pick up a good bargain. One thing to keep an eye out for though is make sure you get the right size. I'm very lucky that my husband bought me the right size with Barbara, and she is exactly the same size as me. So just make sure that you have your measurements, do your homework, and make sure you get the right dress form that fits your body measurements. I absolutely love Barbara. She has become her own personality. Everybody in my house knows who she is. We all love her and we have a lot of fun with her. She loves playing dress up, and not only has she been a massive help with my sewing, but she's also been a massive help with my YouTube channel as well. So I'm kind of happy that she's come to join us today. So there we are. Those are my 7 most favorite sewing tools, which I think have really helped me move my sewing skills and confidence from a beginner through to that intermediate level. That of course also happened because I was willing to go out there and try different methods and techniques to improve my sewing as well. So I've gone out there and tried installing zips and buttons and rouleau loops and different types of facing facings and hemlines and burrito method, installing stand collars and pockets and all these things. So if you are a beginner, just don't hold back. Try all the things slowly but surely, and with every single make, look to do something different to level up your skills. I'm now learning not to be afraid of any of the things, because at the end of the day, it is just sewing. You're not going to die from it. Although I have seen some nasty injuries come out of Project Runway. So here we are at the end of yet another Ripper Seams video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and as always, it's a pleasure having you here. If you enjoyed this video, then please give me a thumbs up, as it lets me know I'm doing a good job and I should make more videos just like this one. Of course, if you haven't already, I invite you to go ahead and click on that subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of my future videos. And with that, I wish you a wonderful week of sewing, and I'll see you in the next video.